100 Apache warriors surrounded a 14-year-old homeless boy's tent at dawn, but what they held in their hands wasn't weapons. It was something that would expose a government conspiracy reaching all the way to Washington, D.C., something that proved this homeless orphan was actually the heir to half the American Southwest, something worth killing for. But here's the part that'll blow your mind. The boy had no idea who he really was, and the man who was about to change everything. He'd been officially dead for 15 years. Tommy Whitehorse was about to discover that giving away his only possession yesterday hadn't just saved a stranger's life. It had triggered a chain of events that would either unite two warring peoples or ignite the bloodiest conflict in frontier history. And the Apache weren't the only ones coming for him. The desert had been a furnace for 6 straight days when Tommy spotted the dying man beside the red rocks. Apache warrior, bleeding, no horse, maybe 2 hours from death in the blazing heat. Tommy's first instinct? Keep walking. Getting involved with Apache in this territory was suicide. But something stopped him. Maybe the way the warrior's chest barely moved. Maybe something deeper. Tommy had one asset. Jeremiah, his stubborn mule. Lose the mule, lose everything. Water supplies, transportation, survival. For a 14-year-old alone in Apache country, it meant death. Can you ride? Tommy asked the dying stranger. The Apache's eyes fluttered open, dark and pain-filled. When Tommy helped him onto Jeremiah's back, something strange happened. The warrior straightened, gaining hidden strength, and stared at Tommy with sudden recognition. Why help enemy? The Apache whispered. Because you're dying and I've got what you need. Tommy shrugged, trying to hide the magnitude of his sacrifice. The warrior studied Tommy's face like he was memorizing it. Then he spoke 3 words in Apache that Tommy didn't understand but felt were crucial. The syllables carried weight beyond sound, like a prayer or prophecy. With that, the Apache clicked his tongue and Jeremiah walked toward the mountains. Tommy watched them disappear, wondering if he'd just committed the most generous act of his life or sealed his death warrant. What Tommy didn't know was that those Apache words translated to "the lost one has returned," and in Apache tradition, when the lost one returns, everything changes. Tommy woke to supernatural silence, the kind that makes every animal freeze when predators approach. Then he heard horses, many horses. He peered through his tent flap and his heart stopped. Apache warriors in a perfect circle around his campsite, mounted on war horses, faces painted for ceremony, but they weren't holding weapons. Each warrior gripped something else entirely. At the circle's front sat a gray-haired war chief whose scars told stories of battles Tommy couldn't imagine. This man radiated authority that made other warriors seem like extensions of his will. Every single Apache was staring directly at Tommy's tent, waiting. Tommy gathered his courage and stepped outside. The entire circle turned in perfect unison, but there was no hostility in their gaze. Instead, he saw something that confused him more than aggression would have. Respect. "You are the boy who saved Joseph Standing Bear," the war chief said in careful English. Not a question, a statement of absolute fact. Tommy nodded, speechless. "Joseph Standing Bear is my nephew. Yesterday he was dying. Today he lives because of your sacrifice. Do you know what this means in Apache law?" Tommy shook his head. "It means the spirits have spoken. The prophecy was true. The lost son has returned not as conqueror, but as brother." Before Tommy could ask what prophecy, another voice cut through the morning air. "The prophecy about you, Thomas Whitehorse." Joseph Standing Bear emerged from behind the warriors looking stronger than when Tommy had saved him. But what made Tommy's legs nearly give out was what Joseph said next. "You have your father's eyes. Your father was my cousin." The world exploded. His father, supposedly dead in a Colorado mining accident when Tommy was 3, was Apache. "Your father was James Whitehorse, son of my sister Morning Star," the war chief continued. "He was murdered by federal agents who discovered he was secretly negotiating peace treaties. But there's more." Joseph stepped closer. "Your father wasn't just protecting treaties. He was guarding the location of the sacred canyon, where 4 Apache bands have hidden treasure worth more than most countries' entire economies. Gold, silver artifacts accumulated over 2 centuries. Tommy stared in bewilderment. I don't know anything about treasure. Your father didn't give you a map. The war chief smiled grimly. He made you into the map. The information is locked in your memory. But before Tommy could process this revelation, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Federal agents, closing fast. They've been hunting you for 11 years, Joseph warned. They know that somewhere in your mind lies the key to a fortune that could fund government operations for decades. Agent Harrison Blackwood and 20 federal marshals formed a battle line facing the Apache warrior. The boy comes with us. By order of the United States government, the war chief stepped protectively in front of Tommy. The boy is under Apache protection. Stand aside or face the consequences, Blackwood replied coldly, drawing his rifle. That's when Tommy made a decision that would change frontier history forever. I'll come with you, Tommy announced, stepping between the armed groups, but not as your prisoner. I call for challenge by combat under Apache law, recognized by Federal Treaty of 1872. Blackwood's face flushed. There will be no Indian ceremonies. Then these 100 Apache warriors escort me to their sacred lands where I'll be beyond your reach forever, Tommy replied. Your choice. Blackwood calculated rapidly. 20 men against 100 Apache on home territory meant suicide. But if he won the challenge, he'd have the boy without fighting a war. My champion against yours. Winner takes all. Agreed. The war chief nodded. Joseph Standing Bear will fight for Thomas Whitehorse. The combat lasted 10 brutal minutes. Joseph moved like smoke around the larger federal champion, demonstrating Apache warrior skills that left even the agents speechless. When it ended, the federal champion lay unconscious while Joseph stood unmarked. This isn't over, boy. Blackwood snarled as his men retreated. We'll find another way. As the agents rode off, something extraordinary happened in Tommy's mind. Memories surfaced. His father teaching him songs in Apache, showing him star patterns, telling stories about a hidden canyon where spirits kept treasures safe from evil. The memory locks are opening, Joseph observed. Your father hid the knowledge behind emotional barriers that would only unlock when you were safe among Apache family. Tommy closed his eyes and let the memories flow. Images of a canyon so beautiful it stole breath, underground chambers filled with gold and silver, and most importantly, the exact route to reach this legendary place. I remember, he whispered. Everything. But remembering the sacred canyon's location was just the beginning, because Agent Blackwood wasn't the only one hunting Tommy. There were others, darker forces willing to kill anyone standing between them and the treasure. And they were closer than anyone suspected. The Apache ceremony of recognition began at noon when desert spirits were most active. Chief Running Wolf, the gray-haired leader, prepared to officially welcome Tommy into the tribe. For 37 years our people have waited for Morning Star's son to return. Today the prophecy begins fulfillment. Warriors approached with gifts representing Apache life. A mountain mahogany bow blessed by shamans, a painted war shield telling Tommy's lineage story, a trained warhorse, buckskin clothing with beadwork marking him as band member, weapons passed down through generations. But the most significant gift came last. Running Wolf carried something wrapped in sacred deerskin, a medallion of turquoise and silver carved with symbols that shifted in sunlight. This belonged to your grandfather, War Chief Morning Star. The symbols tell your bloodline story and serve as a key to the sacred canyon entrance. Tommy stared at the medallion, feeling generations of Apache history pressing on his shoulders. What if I don't want this responsibility? The choice is yours, Running Wolf said gently. Walk away and return to wandering the desert, or embrace your heritage and help your people enter a new prosperity era. Tommy looked around the circle of hopeful faces. For the first time in his life he truly belonged somewhere. I accept. The moment silver touched his chest, the medallion's symbols began glowing blue, and Tommy felt energy connecting him to every Apache who had ever lived. Images flashed through his mind. His grandfather leading war parties, his father negotiating secret treaties, Apache shamans performing sacred ceremonies. But the peaceful moment shattered when gunfire erupted from the ridge. Ambush, Joseph shouted. These weren't federal agents. They were private mercenaries with no government allegiance. They wanted the sacred canyon's location and would kill anyone in their way. Bullets whistled through the ceremonial circle as Apache warriors scrambled for cover. Tommy found himself behind a boulder next to Running Wolf, who calmly loaded his rifle. 30 professional killers, Running Wolf assessed. Someone with significant resources sent them. Who? Railroad companies wanting to build through Apache lands, mining companies suspecting valuable deposits, government officials wanting treasure for political funding. Even foreign governments would pay handsomely for Apache gold. The gunfight was brutal but brief. Apache warriors, outnumbered but fighting on familiar ground, gradually eliminated the mercenaries with supernatural marksmanship. But Tommy noticed something chilling. The attackers specifically targeted him. They wanted him alive but were willing to risk killing him to prevent Apache protection. They know about the medallion, he realized. They know I'm the key. When the last mercenary fell, Running Wolf's expression was grim. They'll return with more men and better weapons. Then we reach the sacred canyon first, Tommy decided, surprising himself with his decisiveness. We secure the treasure before someone else claims it. The journey requires crossing hostile territory, desert that kills experienced warriors and now will be hunted every step, Joseph warned. Then we'd better start moving, Tommy replied, touching the medallion. Something tells me we're running out of time. The hidden path to the sacred canyon began at rocks shaped like 3 fingers pointing skyward. Tommy, Joseph, and Running Wolf reached it as the full moon rose, casting everything in silver light. From here we travel only at night, Running Wolf explained as they left their horses. The final approach must be on foot and the path is treacherous. How far? Tommy asked. 2 nights of hard climbing. If we're not discovered, if we don't encounter guardian spirits, if the path hasn't changed since anyone last visited, guardian spirits. Running Wolf's scarred face was grim. The sacred canyon is protected by more than difficult terrain. Apache shamans placed spiritual barriers generations ago. Barriers that test anyone seeking entry, especially those with mixed blood. What kind of test? The kind revealing your true nature. The spirits show visions of your past, future, and deepest fears. Many warriors turn back rather than face what spirits reveal. As they climbed through passages barely wide enough for human bodies, strange things happened. The medallion grew hot, then burning, responding to their proximity to the sacred canyon. Voices whispered in desert wind. Apache words Tommy somehow understood despite never learning the language. The spirits recognize you, Joseph observed. Your Apache blood is strong enough to claim tribal heritage. But Tommy heard more than Apache voices. Spanish voices, English voices, languages he didn't recognize. The canyon was calling to everyone who had ever sought its secrets. On the second night they reached a plateau offering their first view of their destination. The sacred canyon spread below like a hidden world, walls rising hundreds of feet into starlit sky. Water cascaded down canyon walls in silver streams, catching moonlight like liquid diamonds. Trees created an impossible green oasis in desert heart. Symbols carved into walls glowed with inner light. There, Running Wolf pointed to a narrow canyon wall opening, the entrance to treasure chambers. But reaching it requires crossing the floor of visions. Tommy looked down at perfectly flat sand and rock. What's dangerous about that? The floor shows each person crossing it the truth about themselves, Joseph explained. Some truths are harder to face than others. Some people never cross because they cannot accept what they see. And some discover they are not who they thought. Running Wolf added darkly. that their entire self-understanding was built on lies. Before Tommy could dwell on fears, approaching voices made them freeze. The mercenaries had found them again, but this time they weren't alone. At least 3 different groups converged from different directions. Mercenaries, federal agents, and a third unidentified group. "We're trapped," Joseph whispered. "No," Tommy said firmly. "We're exactly where we need to be. Time to end this chase and face whatever's waiting in the sacred canyon. There are 30 armed men out there," Running Wolf protested. "Even fighting through them, we'd be too wounded to survive the Floor of Vision's trial." "Then we don't fight them," Tommy replied. "We let them follow us into the canyon. Let the spirits deal with them." Joseph stared in horror. "You can't bring armed enemies into the sacred canyon. It's sacrilege. The spirits will protect what needs protecting," Tommy said with confidence he didn't entirely feel. "More importantly, down there with all those groups fighting each other, we might finally learn who's really behind this, who killed my father and what they really want." The descent into Sacred Canyon was like entering another world. Desert sounds above faded to nothing, replaced by otherworldly silence broken only by wind through stone and distant falling water. The medallion was now burning against Tommy's skin, pulsing with his heartbeat rhythm. But more disturbing were visions flickering at side edges, glimpses of people and events both foreign and familiar. Above them, pursuit sounds grew closer as multiple armed groups prepared to follow them into the canyon. At least 4 different groups, Tommy assessed, his enhanced hearing picking up distinct accents. Federal agents, mercenary, what sounds like Mexican soldiers, and educated accent speakers. Railroad or mining executives. Running Wolf spat. Rich men wanting Apache treasure for corporations. As they crossed the canyon floor toward the carved entrance, Tommy began understanding Joseph's warning about the Floor of Visions. The ground wasn't just sand and stone. It was alive with memory, showing glimpses of everyone who had ever walked this path. He saw Apache shamans performing ancient ceremonies, Spanish conquistadors desperately searching for gold, Mexican officials hiding stolen artifacts. Most disturbing, he saw his father, James Whitehorse, walking this same path 20 years ago, carrying documents someone had been willing to kill for. "Look," Joseph called softly. Tommy followed his gaze to symbols carved into the canyon wall, clearly visible in moonlight. They matched his medallion exactly, but these weren't ancient Apache pictographs. They were newer, carved by someone who knew their meaning. "My father was here recently. These are his markers." Running Wolf examined the symbols with amazement. "These tell a story about hidden chambers beneath the canyon floor. Chambers containing more than gold and silver." "What else?" "Documents, maps, evidence of crimes reaching American government's highest levels. Names of people who conspired to steal Apache lands through forged treaties and false land grants." The implications hit Tommy like a physical blow. His father hadn't just protected Apache treasure, he'd safeguarded evidence that could bring down America's most powerful people. Gunfire erupted behind them as their pursuers reached the canyon floor, already fighting among themselves for treasure rights. "This way," Tommy said, following his father's symbol path. The carved doorway was sealed by a stone disc covered with Apache symbols. As Tommy approached wearing his grandfather's medallion, the disc began glowing with blue light. "Place your hand on the center symbol," Joseph instructed. "But be prepared, opening this entrance will announce our presence to every canyon spirit." Tommy pressed his palm against the central symbol. The entire canyon held its breath. Then, with thunder-like grinding, the stone disc rolled aside, revealing a tunnel leading deep into the mountain. But opening the entrance had an unexpected effect. The fighting behind them stopped as all pursuing groups realized someone had reached the treasure chambers ahead of them. "Move fast," Running Wolf urged. "They'll come after us now, all together." The tunnel was carved from living rock. decorated with pictographs that moved in flickering torchlight. But these weren't just decorative, they told a story, the true history of the sacred canyon and its treasure. My God, Tommy breathed, understanding the pictograph's revelation. This isn't just Apache treasure. This is where the Spanish expedition of 1847 made their final stand. Images showed Spanish soldiers and Mexican officials fighting Apache warriors for canyon control, but the Spanish weren't just carrying gold and silver. They carried chests of documents, maps showing real Spanish territorial boundaries, evidence that major American land acquisitions were based on forged treaties. Your father wasn't the first to discover this place, Joseph realized. Spanish found it first, using it to hide corruption evidence. Then Apache claimed it. Then your father found it and understood what it really contained. Moving deeper, Tommy grasped his father's discovery's full scope. The sacred canyon wasn't just hiding Apache treasure. It held evidence that could invalidate American claims to vast southwest sections, potentially returning millions of acres to Apache control and costing the U.S. government billions in reparations. No wonder they killed him, Tommy said grimly. This information could destroy careers, topple administrations, rewrite American territorial expansion history. They reached the main treasure chamber as pursuit sounds echoed from the tunnel behind. What they found exceeded Tommy's wildest imagination. The chamber was vast, carved from the mountain itself, supported by natural stone pillars, creating cathedral-like spaces filled with gold and silver chests. But more importantly, it contained a library, hundreds of documents, maps and official papers preserved in sealed containers. And standing in the chamber center, as if waiting for them, was a figure Tommy recognized from old photographs. His father, James Whitehorse, was alive. "Hello, son," James said quietly. "I wish we were meeting under different circumstances." Tommy stared in shock, unable to process seeing his supposedly dead father. "They told me you died in a mining accident, buried in Colorado. I had to disappear," James explained. "After discovering what was hidden here, I realized certain people would never stop hunting me until they recovered these documents. The only way to protect you was faking my death and hiding." "Protect me from what?" Tommy demanded, anger replacing shock. "From the truth about who you really are, and from people who would use that truth to destroy everything Apache people have built." Joseph and Running Wolf stood frozen, listening to conversation, rewriting everything they understood about Apache prophecy and territorial politics. "I don't understand," Tommy said. "I'm your son, part Apache through my grandmother, apparently the key to unlocking this treasure cave. What else is there?" James took a deep breath, struggling with how much to reveal. "Tommy, your mother wasn't who I told you. She wasn't a white woman who died in childbirth." Tommy felt the world tilting. Then who was she? Elena Vasquez, daughter of the Spanish colonial governor who originally hid these documents here. She was also an Apache captive raised by Morning Star's band since childhood. "You're not just part Apache, son. You're heir to both Spanish colonial claims and Apache tribal rights to this entire territory." The implications exploded through Tommy's mind. If true, he wasn't just a homeless boy stumbling into Apache prophecy. He was legitimate heir to vast territorial claims predating American Southwest expansion. "That's impossible," he whispered. "It's documented in Spanish archives hidden here," James replied, gesturing toward sealed containers. Elena Vasquez was officially declared heir to her father's colonial grants before Apache capture. Under both Spanish colonial law and Apache tribal law, you have legitimate claim to territories the U.S. government has administered illegally for 40 years. Running Wolf suddenly understood the prophecy's full scope. This is why prophecy spoke of a white Apache uniting scattered bands. Not because he'd be a great warrior, but because he'd have legal authority no one could challenge. And why federal agents hunted him so desperately, Joseph added. They're not just recovering stolen treasure, they're preventing a legal challenge that could cost them half the Southwest. But before they could discuss implications further, approaching voices announced their pursuers had reached the treasure chamber. Agent Blackwood, mercenary leaders and at least 2 other groups had followed them into the sacred canyon, about to discover the homeless boy they'd hunted was actually the territory's most dangerous person. James Whitehorse, Agent Blackwood called, entering with his men. "We meet at last. I was beginning to think you really were dead." "Agent Blackwood," James replied calmly, "still working for people who prefer murder to legal proceedings." "Nothing personal," Blackwood said coldly, "but national security requires certain documents never see daylight." Behind Blackwood came mercenary leaders, Mexican soldiers and expensive suited men clearly representing railroad or mining interests. All armed, all determined to claim chamber treasures. But as they spread out to secure the area, something unexpected happened. Ancient Apache symbols carved into chamber walls began glowing with the same blue light from Tommy's medallion. The spirits guarding the sacred canyon finally made their presence known. Temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly. Torches flickered and dimmed, casting dancing shadows moving independently of flames. Voices began whispering in languages predating European contact with the Americas. "What's happening?" a mercenary asked nervously. "The spirits are angry," Running Wolf announced with grim satisfaction. "You brought weapons into sacred space, came seeking to steal rather than honor. This place's guardians won't allow that." The whispers grew louder, becoming an Apache voice chorus raised in lament and warning. Several mercenaries backed toward the tunnel entrance, spooked by supernatural atmosphere, but Agent Blackwood remained unmoved. "Enough theatrics. Secure those document containers and prepare to evacuate." "I don't think the spirits will allow that," Tommy said quietly, touching his medallion and feeling power flowing through it. "Boy, I don't care if you think you're some Apache messiah," Blackwood replied harshly. "You're coming with us and these documents returned to federal custody where they belong." "Actually," said a new voice from the tunnel entrance, "I think you'll find that's not happening." Everyone turned to see a woman emerging from shadows, flanked by 2 unrecognized Apache warriors. She was beautiful in a way suggesting both Spanish and Apache heritage, carrying herself with authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "Elena," James Whitehorse whispered, face pale with shock. "But you're dead?" the woman replied with a smile. "Both warm and dangerous." "Yes, that's what we wanted everyone to believe. Just like we wanted everyone believing our son was just another homeless orphan wandering the desert." Tommy stared in stunned recognition. This woman had his eyes, bone structure, stubborn chin. After 14 years believing he was an orphan, he suddenly faced both parents. "Hello, Thomas," Elena Vasquez said gently. "Time you learned the truth about who you really are, and why so many people are willing to kill to control your destiny." But as mother and son stared at each other across the treasure chamber, Agent Blackwood made a decision, triggering the final, most dangerous confrontation phase. He drew his gun and pointed it directly at Tommy's head. "Enough family reunions," he snarled. "The boy comes with us, now, or everyone in this chamber dies." What happened next would be remembered as the moment when one 14-year-old boy changed the American frontier forever. Because Elena Vasquez wasn't just Tommy's mother. She was also the leader of a secret alliance between Apache bands, Mexican resistance fighters, and Spanish colonial heirs who had been planning for this moment for 20 years. And Agent Blackwood had just made the mistake of threatening the one person who could unite them all. "Agent Blackwood," Elena said with deadly calm, "you're pointing a gun at the legal heir to half the American Southwest. Do you really think that's wise?" Legal heir. Blackwood laughed harshly. The boy's a homeless orphan with a head full of Indian fairy tales. The boy, Elena replied, is Thomas Vasquez Whitehorse, documented heir to the Vasquez colonial grant of 1821, which encompasses everything from the Colorado River to the Rio Grande. Every ranch, every mine, every railroad, every settlement in this territory exists on land that legally belongs to my son. The chamber fell dead silent as the implications sank in. You're lying, Blackwood said, but his voice carried less certainty. The documents are right here. James gestured toward the sealed containers. Authenticated Spanish colonial records, Apache tribal agreements, Mexican territorial confirmations. All of it proves Tommy's legal claim to territories worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Which is why, Elena continued, certain people in Washington have been so desperate to find him, not to recover stolen treasure but to eliminate the one person who could challenge American territorial claims in court. Tommy stared at his parents, finally understanding the full scope of the conspiracy that had shaped his entire life. You faked both your deaths to protect me, he realized, and to gather allies, Elena confirmed. For 20 years we've been building a coalition of Apache bands, Mexican freedom fighters and Spanish colonial families, all united behind one goal: restoring legitimate ownership to territories stolen through forged documents and fraudulent treaties. Agent Blackwood's face was purple with rage. I don't care if the boy's the king of Spain. National security trumps colonial land grants. Does it? Elena smiled dangerously. Because I think you'll find that the Mexican government is very interested in these documents, as is the Spanish crown, as are several European newspapers who would love to expose American territorial fraud. You're threatening the United States government, Blackwood snarled. I'm offering the United States government a choice, Elena replied calmly. Recognize Apache sovereignty over traditional lands, provide fair compensation for territories illegally occupied, and establish permanent peace treaties, or face international legal challenges that could cost America its entire Southwest expansion. Tommy felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. Everything in his life had led to this moment, the decision that would determine whether the American frontier entered a new era of peace or exploded into the bloodiest war in its history. What do you want me to do? He asked his parents. The choice is yours, son, James said quietly. You can walk away from all this, return to being a homeless boy wandering the desert, or you can embrace your heritage and help reshape the balance of power in the American West. Tommy looked around the treasure chamber at the faces surrounding him, Apache warriors who had risked everything to protect him, federal agents willing to kill to stop him, mercenaries and politicians whose greed had driven them to the sacred canyon, his parents, who had sacrificed 20 years of their lives to give him this choice, and he realized that some destinies are too large to escape. I accept my heritage, Tommy said firmly, touching the medallion around his neck, but not to start a war, to end one. He turned to Agent Blackwood. Agent, you can try to kill me and start a conflict that will destroy everything your government has built in the Southwest, or you can go back to Washington and tell them that Thomas Vasquez Whitehorse is offering them the deal of the century. What kind of deal? Blackwood asked suspiciously. Shared sovereignty, Tommy replied, the words coming from some deep well of wisdom he hadn't known he possessed. Apache self-governance over traditional lands with American territorial authority over settler regions, fair compensation for past wrongs but recognition of current realities, and most importantly, peace between peoples who have been fighting for too long. The chamber was silent as everyone processed the magnitude of what Tommy was proposing. You think the government will accept that? Blackwood asked. I think the government will accept whatever prevents a legal challenge that could cost them half the continent, Tommy replied. But more than that, I think it's time both sides chose hope over fear. Elena smiled with pride at her son. You sound like your father when he was negotiating peace treaties. Maybe, Tommy said. But this time we're negotiating from a position of strength. As the various groups in the chamber began to realize that the homeless boy they'd been chasing was actually offering them a path to peace instead of war, Tommy Whitehorse made one final decision that would seal his legend forever. He walked to the nearest document container, opened it and pulled out a thick scroll covered with official Spanish colonial seals. This is the original Vasquez colonial grant, he announced. Legal title to territories currently occupied by 3 states and 2 territories. According to these documents, I own land worth more money than most countries' entire economies. He held the scroll over one of the torches illuminating the chamber. But you know what? Some things are more important than money. And with that, Tommy Whitehorse, homeless orphan, Apache warrior, heir to half the American Southwest, made the choice that would transform him from a boy seeking survival into a legend remembered for generations. The sacred canyon had revealed its greatest secret, but the greatest secret of all was that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose love over hatred, hope over fear, and peace over the endless cycle of revenge. And sometimes it takes a 14-year-old boy who started with nothing to show the entire world what true wealth really means.